Let me get a drink.
I wrote to you. I don't know, my message aren't going through. Yeah, I wrote to
Yeah,
you.
no, I did get it. If you write me on Skype, but I don't look at it too much, and it doesn't register on my phone, so I wouldn't know. Okay, so we got
Okay.
to page Reish Samach Daled, and I wanted to show you a question that I had that I answered for myself at the very bottom of the right column. He says, Amnan bihiyoski gam bina shall reisha delo isida mislavish begugolta de erikanpen. Well, that's a phrase I never heard before, and it struck me, how does the Gulgon know this? And then I realized because the Reisha delo isida is unknowable, so we don't really know exactly what it is, but he didn't say that it's this and that. He just said, if you knew what the bina was of the Reisha delo isida, he says that lines up in the Gugalta. That's the way I answered myself. I don't know if you heard my question, but that was my question. Let's go on to number base over here. He says this is the second tikkun of the Gugolta. He says kruma davira hatika nasheni hu krum. It's a crust. Hamachase v'seisim as a mochas. It covers over. It seals up the mochas of Eric Anpin. Shalo yatsa ora l'chutz, and this keeps the light of Eric Anpin from getting out of Besoch ha-krum, and so in the midst of this krum, hazech meluvish v'ganus ha-vira. So inside of the crust there's a vira the krum. Ha-nikra gam avira dachya, which is called a very fine or a thin, some kind of a layer of air. So he says this is inside of the krum. Shehu sod ha'aras ha-chesed shal reishad lo yisyid. So in this place, in this krum, which has this avira in it, that's the place where you find the chesed of the Reishad Lo Isyada, Haganas of Maluvat Basoch HaKrum, which is hidden inside of the krum. 1 second. Okay, whatever. Which is hidden inside of the krum, Shuhu Sod Ha'aras HaChesed, which is the secret of chesed, Reishad Lo Isyada, Haganas Maluvat Basoch HaKrum, which is in the krum. Okay. Avira, and amidst this avira that we're talking about, now he put the avira inside of the krum. There's a higher level of air. He said, now give me a break here. He says, what is this? He says, what is it? Inside of the avira, inside of the krum. There's also hidden in there another kind of air. That air is a not, I was going to say reflection. It's a radiance that's coming from the Shevet Tachtonis, the Chachma Shal Reish Lo Isya, the Hanikra of the Virish She'ena Nitbas. It's an ungraspable air. It's really going deep into this, and I don't think I heard that either before. The Nikra Gam Gam. Let's see, did I mix that up? Let me turn the page here. So it's also called by another name. This is called the Chochmas Yilos Dimor. HaChochma Elyon Hastuma. So what? This other air, which has another name of Vira She'ena Nitbaz, it's the Zat of the Chochma, which we don't really know what composes the Chochma, but let's say there is, and then its Zat winds up inside of this. The Lo Isida Anikra Avira She'ena Nitpa, so there's another air inside of the air. Chachmas Ilos is of Av Shachakrum Soisim as a Mochas Dimoch Avira. So all of this is really closed up, right? Even though we know that Im Kol Zechab is Dakech, but what happens is, I guess because of the lack of physicality of what's beyond it, it starts to refine it. In other words, thin out the krum. The Yotze b'mena or, and some light does come out. So how is this the zichur come about? Because there's an attachment there to the race of the low isya. They gave us two different paths there. Hamislavish betocha avira, which is inside of the avira, hagana bezocha krum, which is inside the krum. So he really went to three different levels of depth here, and he had mentioned which I hadn't seen. The zat of the chokmah, the race of lo isi, there's penimi to all of this. Yado botesh and so therefore it's banging around in there. Botesh, it strikes the avira, and it strikes inside of this skull, this crust. And so through this, mizdake kachrum, then the krum gets refined out because of the fact that there's movement in there sometime, or he doesn't explain why it's banging, but it's banging. And what happens then? Yotze derech hakrum ha'ara shel or. So then we see now there is a radiance that's coming out of this, of light that's coming out of the krum. And that's because in the panemius of the krum, that you have this banging around going on. So he says, "V'oz yotzech b'derek hakrum ha'ara shel or." Amnam afshah hakrum nizdakech. So even though we understand that the covering is becoming thinned out, im kol zecha b'sasimihu, but no, nonetheless it still closes. Adayim hu nishar sasam. So okay, it remains sasim, but there's a little, bleeding that's coming through from the inside outward. V'soisim oras ha-mochas dima v'avira. So it actually does close up the mochas dima and the avira. Ki eina yotze mechem etzem ha'or, because we're not talking about the actual light itself, but we're talking about there's a glow from the light that makes it out. El rak ha'or b'vad. Shehi sod ha'aras ha'chesed shal reisha lo yisya de'rabanizka le'el. And that what comes out, he says, let me just look at it a little more closely. Ha'aras ha'chesed, this is the light of the chesed that we were talking about, which comes from the Reisha de lo Isyada, or in other words, he's calling everything an Atik Yamim Reisha lo Isyada, even the Zat. So he's saying even the chesed. So this, now you just heard the second tikkun, the tikkun of the Gegolta, which is called the Kruma de Ravira. Asher bo mislavish teferes shal reish lo isyada. Now, where did this come from? Wait a minute. We had in the Avira, we had another Avira that was up above that, and now he says Asher bo mislavish teferes shal reish lo isyada. So that's the middle line of the reish lo isyada. Ba'al yada b'yotzer b'mizgala ha'aras ha'chesed shal reish lo isyada. So it is through the teferes. Just let me look. This teferes just popped up here. So he says, again, from the word v'hinei, he says, v'hinei zehu inyan tikun hasheni hanikra kruma davira, so that crust, that we described it, and it has inside of it, and inside of that, asher bon mislavish teferes shal reisha lo isyada, and in all that krum you also have, he says this kruma devira also is affected by the teferes of the reisha lo yisida al yado yotzach bizgala ha'aras ha'chesed, and this causes this. I'm trying to understand what's the relationship between teferes and chesed. So he says, because I know teferes is the middle line, so he says the chesed is the right line. So he said yado yotzach bizgala ha'aras ha'chesed shall reisha lo yisida. By Inyan, so trying to understand this is ha'chesed shall reisha lo yisida. Or it's a light shall yom harishon shaganas HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's this light that we're talking about. What is it again? It's the chesed of the Reisha lo Isyada. That's the light that's hidden away. The only way that you can see it is that when it's inside of Teferes. Now let me just say like this: did we learn other places that the that the zat of the Reisha lo Yisida is in a straight line? So if it's in a straight line, it means that Chesed has to go into Teferes in order to be able to move. I'm trying to understand why it is that Chesed needs Teferes. Yochol to his galos ala ayeder hislav shebesocha Teferes. Why? Shehu so the kruma, because the Teferes is, I don't know, is the secret of the krum itself. So we now we see that the spreading of this chesed is going through the kruma davira. So first it strikes the kruma davira, so hamochas dimah, and inside, what is this? Kachu shetachila botesh, it strikes. Hakruma deivara besoch hamochas dimah. It's inside of the mochas dimah and it strikes it, or in the inside of the kruma, it's touching the mochas dimah, something like that. Shu so zivug ne'elam shall levirichalom mochas dimah. Did you know that? That apparently there's a zivug that takes place, and completely, totally hidden, between the avira ilah and the mochas dimah. Wow. So he said, "Va'az nichlal ha'aras ha'chesed ha'nitzka b'soch ha'mochas dimah." So now we see also the radiance that's coming from the chesed. That's inside of the mochas dimah, because now I guess the kruma, which is related to the chesed, is now touching the mochas dimah, kederek zivug, and so that touching, he says, is like a yichud. Shachadacher noisin the shefet the nook. So what's happening is the male is giving the shefet to the nook. Now, which one is which? So you have to assume that the benemius is the male. So it's the krumas timah, the kruma, that is somehow touching the mochas timah, and then he says nosin the shefel the nukva. So then the mochas timah becomes female. And then after that, this chesed, ha'ara from it, comes out from this avira, because we had said that the positioning of these causes the kruma to become more thinned out. And this whole idea of this chesed winds up being clothed inside of the forehead. And now this light of chesed that we're talking about, that is secondary light, it spreads, and it spreads until it reaches the mazdlos. I guess he says just mazel adikna de erikanpen shehu, so this pashtos tikkun kruma devar, which is where you see the secret of the spread of the tikkun of the kruma, the avira kadei legalos ha'aras ha'chesed, in order to be able to reveal the chesed that is coming out of the forehead of Eric Anpin. Now that was the second one, and that had a lot of surprises in it, if you ask me. Let's go on. It says Omanaki. So now he pronounces Nikei. Let me get it right then. Amar Nakei. Is a Rabbatik in the Shlishi whose Saris Rosh Eric Anpin. Let's talk about that. Shehem Ketzemelovan, they're like white wool, Vanaki, and clean. In other words, cleaned up. Kiyom Hivoldu, like on the day that I guess the sheep is born. That is fresh, new. That is that the hairs. Here's what he defines as nikim, clean. He says they're not tangled. What we're trying to get at here is Shekol Hasaros Heim Rachmim. The concept of the hairs of Erikonpin are Rachmim. Veim Mesuvchim Behem Saros Shal Dinim, and they're not mixed up into them and tangled with them. The hairs that come with Dinim, Saros Shnei Achazim Bechem, are other hairs that come from different places, Bechem Bechitzonim, which come from the outside. Alas Aros Chalalucha B'Dekiyim Heim Bekol Dinim, because they're clean from any Dinim. Vein bechem shum b'chiza the chitzonim, and they don't hold on to the chitzonim at all. Va'ad the rabba chasaras elu hein koifim es chitzonim. They bend them down. They overpower the chitzonim. Talian b'shikula, and also they hang down evenly. V'chasaras taluyim b'mishuloshem ma'erik anpin b'shikul echad, in one measure. She'ein shir echad arach, so ein seir. Excuse me. Echad aruch yosa mechavera, because there's not a situation where one hair is longer than the next. Behind avishum shas aras yotzim kulam b'shava, because the hairs all come out equal. Memuach echad, they're all coming from one place, from the moach snimah. So we understand that the root of these hairs, hu b'moach snimah, is inside of the moach snimah. And they go upwards. Now let me see this again. The shores of the hairs that we're talking about come from the muchsnima, and they're going upwards. We've seen this before. Al golgalas harosh, and they come out and they wind up going on top of the head. And since they're going backwards, because that's the concept of dinim. I call it editing. That they're constantly looking at what's wrong and trying to make it right. That's the concept of dinim v'ha'inyan, who the dinyan is like this. Ki ba'amanake, when we talk about this, or nakeh, when we talk about this clean wool, Meir Gavura, this is where you see the Gavura shine shall reisha the lo isyada of the reisha the lo isyada. It's in the muchstima. Hamaluvish b'muchstima. V'lechein, v'lekach, and for this reason, heim dinim Gavura, so therefore they're the dinim, they're the Gavuros. Because that's where it comes from, because there's an origin in there which is this gevura of Atik. El shehem bechinas dinim kefufim. What they are dinim, but they're humble dinim. That's that concept of rayo. I don't know if he's not saying that here. He says el shehem bechinas dinim kefufim, humble dinim. Ki lamala be'erik anpen hakol rachamim, because up there everything is rachamim. So then he goes on and he says, "How we doing here? We're okay." So Rava the Ravim. Now we come to this phrase, and I always are concerned about the meaning of this. Atikan the Revi who rots on the Ritzonas is the will of wills. Shuhu hametzach shall. Okay, so maybe it doesn't mean will. Maybe it means, because you're not back in the red metzach, he said maybe it means the acceptance, or being wanted, like that. Shuhu hametzach shall rosh erik anpen hanikra metzach haratzon, which is called the metzach of acceptance. Ubo hu shorish kol haritzonos, and this is where all of the idea of wanting to accept, or wanting to something like that. Kol haritzonos shall kol hapartzufim bekol hahechelos, because this is where this template that we're discussing here exists in all partzufim, all the way across. Is galia betzeluza de satoy. When do you see this metzach haratzon? Because we understand is that the hairs are parted, then you have this metzach haratzon. So he says, so when we're praying, learning Torah, he says this causes that face, that forehead rather, to be revealed. Kagon, he says, like a b'shas tefilas mincha. For example, let's take mincha time. Shel Shabbos. Shahu Eis Ratzon, that is the time of the ultimate closeness to Hashem. So still looking for a good English word for Ratzon that would fit this idea. I guess I'm saying acceptance. And then all of our tefillos are accepted. But Inyan, the answer is like this: Ki Tiferes shall Reishad Lo Isyada. Let's go back to the Tiferes of Reishad Lo Isyada, which he said previously, if I'm not mistaken, is responsible for the appearance of Chesed coming out of the out of the Gugolus of Erik Anpen. He says Shehuba Bechinas Ratzon. Mislavish Bemetzach Erik Anpen and Nikro Ratzon Beritzonos, because that's where it's found. He said this Chesed, that's where it's the Tiferes which brings the Chesed, that's where it's found. That's what I'm saying. Oh, the Tiferes the Reishad Lo Isyada. So when you're talking about the Tiferes of the Reishad Lo Isyada, Ganas and Belubish Aras Chesed shall Reishad Lo Isyada. So this, what he wanted to say is that inside of that it pulls in the Chesed and it makes that revealed. So he wants to say what's in what aspect of Atek Yomim is in the forehead, that aspect which is Tiferes. That's where you find the Tiferes of Atek Yomim. But inside of the Atek Yomim is the Chesed of Atek Yomim. So therefore, when we're praying Nimshach Tosefes, or so that you have this additional amount of light, Derek Metzach Erik Anpen, that goes through the forehead of Erik Anpen, talking about Dinim Sheshorshim B'Malachim. Shemesa. So therefore you have the possibility of sweetening all of those dinim from this place of acceptance, where the root is in the malachim, of course, that died. So he says ashgacha or ashgacha. Tikkun achamishi. What's the fifth tikkun? Now we got to the forehead. Who b'bechinas hashgacha shel Erik Anpen is the supervision of Erik Anpen. Who tikkun einayim, which is what? He looks with the eyes, shall Erik Anpen. Pekicha, that is the opening. Pekipa, pekidecha ba'ayin, dezecha shall Erik Anpen. If you could talk about this eye of Erik Anpen, hu patuach, it's open. Commotion Amr, like we said, like this, asher einacho pekuchos v'hainu, that your eyes are open. That is to say, the fi shahanayim shall Erik Anpen, because Erik Anpen's eyes, ein lechem kisui shall afafayim, it doesn't have eyelids. He said, also there's no eyebrows or eyelashes. The lo noim, because he never sleeps. These eyes never go to sleep. They're also always guarding us. He always is looking at us with these eyes that never close. Like it says like this, the Inyan is like this, ki Oros einayim al yonu kavacha v'yantzach b'tehila b'gam ba'olam adohu. So he said, let me just translate. I went real fast. The lights of the eyes, the upper eyes, they all went out originally. Gam ba'olam atohu. Those eyes were involved then too. L'kach me'irim echanayim tamid. So therefore they continuously shine. They've always been shining. It doesn't really depend on what we're doing down here. They were even shining when there was nothing to shine onto because it was all breaking. That's my interpretation. The eyes are not dependent on anything. Whereas we see okay. So wait a minute. He has two eyes, one on the right, one on the left. Because now we see they're only like one eye, shall yamin barachmin. Okay, so the similar. We're considering the two eyes of Eric Anpin. There's only one of the tikkunim. Even though that you say, well, why not make it two tikkunim? Because he said, no, it's not like that. They're one tikkun. But Inyan is like this. Then now we're down to getting lower down. We went to the Tiferes. Now we're going down the line, and we have Netzach and Hod come up next. There in the racial of the shall racial lo isyada mislabjim b'shnei anayim shall Eric Anpin. Those two. That's interesting. So he says the eyes of Eric Anpin are related to the Netzach Hod of Atik Yomim. Umakevish Netzach v'Hod nechshaven le'echa b'sel trei palgi gufa. What's the word? Palgi de gufa. So he says, but since we always understand that Netzach and Hod are considered to be a split entity, in other words, there's two of them instead of one, and they're always one body. L'kach, therefore, gam shnei einayim. So we're saying the same thing about the eyes. Shall Eric Anpin eina nechshava the shnei tikunim nifradim. That's not considered to be two different nikudim. Ela rak l'tikun echad, only one tikun. So, because just like Netzach and Hod are really only one, v'hine kol ma she'amarno she'ein b'bechina shina b'chinayim. So look at. He said what we say over here about everything, that there is no aspect of sleep when we come to the eyes. Who rak l'mala be'ene Eric Anpin. That's only in Eric Anpin's eyes. Avach l'mat be'ene zer Anpin. Zer Anpin? Yesh b'china shina. There is an aspect of shina. So then we see that Eric Anpin is not really looking at this world. The lower level of supervision, it means that looking at us, the law, compared it to the gashgacha that's coming from up above. Sometimes you see that Zer Anpin is looking at us. So there's looking coming through Zer Anpin. And we see that Zer Anpin is not going to sleep. The only reason why it's able to do that is because it's getting a direct light, or some kind, he doesn't say the word direct, it's a higher level, a panemius of the light that's coming from Eric Anpin into the eyes of Zer Anpin. Commotion Amr, like it says like this, Asher ayin ba'ayin nira ata Hashem. It's an interesting fact. He says that when it says ayin ba'ayin, that it really means that you're talking about Eric Anpin into Zer Anpin, which is tremendous mila. Am the b'shal she'ein meir hashgacha al yoyne shel Eric Anpin. Lesson. He says when the hashgacha al yoyne is not shining into Zer Anpin, azah yesh b'china shina b'Zer Anpin goes to sleep. On this way it says Ura, wake up. Lama tisha navaya. Why should Yud Kei Vav Kei, which is Zer Anpin, be sleeping? And Bavar inyan ha'aras hashgacha al yoyne. So now let's explain what we're talking about, this upper supervision. V'amba b'nichibid debay. He says with illumination that's coming from Miki ha'aras al yoyne chazos. So he says this upper light. He says he b'koich or ha'alyon. Let me see. Or ha'elyon shal mochas dimah. So, what is really the power source, the generator of what is his word of this ha'ara that we're talking about? It's from the mochas dimah, the Eric Anpin. Hameir betoch gavonei haloven, which is shining from the whitenesses shall ene Eric Anpin out through the lights. the eyes of Eric Anpin. V'az nimshach or gavon lavon min eni Eric Anpin. And then we see that it's extended down to them this white light that comes from the eyes of Eric Anpin, El Eni Zer Anpin, and they come into the eyes of Zer Anpin, Lamata, which is down below. So understand the generator. We just went through some stuff with the Mochas Timah. I mean, really could be read 20 times, try to get to all those relationships. But here we are. He said when the Mochas Timah is the generator that causes the whiteness to come out, veneer Chotzim Ene Zer Anpin, and they wash the eyes of Zer Anpin, Mikol Gavoner Admimus, from all the different colors of redness, the shachros or blackness, Shaldinim, God forbid, Zechet Ne'emer Einov, right? Rochsos B'chalav, that's that other idea, and I think we'll stop here, right?
Right.
Okay, listen, thanks so much for coming back. Call Tuv and enjoy, and I'll work on those books and see what you think. You know what? If you go to that website, he's got a lot of books now, and there may be something you like more. So I'm always looking around. I'd like to figure out what Yavor is like, and Birchos Kohanim and like that stuff. Okay, bye. Have a great day.